Good morning, everyone. My name is Ross Davies. I serve on the Board of Directors of the Ontario Association of Broadcasters, and I'd like to welcome you to what we hope will be a day full of education, insight, and most importantly, great conversation. The focus of the OAB Conference Planning Committee this year, which first started meeting over 6 months ago, had the goal in mind of how can we grow the business of radio today and tomorrow. And I think there's lots of things that we as a conference and all of us as an industry can do to achieve that. 90% of Canadians listen to radio every week. That's over 27 million people. Over 34 million people watch conventional television every week. These are two far from dying breeds. And yet we hear an awful lot of that stuff about the death of television and the death of radio. How long have we been hearing that? More Canadians listen to radio each week than people checking out their Facebook pages do in 1 month. I don't think enough people realize that. $1.6 billion in revenue last year. That number is relatively stable from year to year. But I think what we have to do is we say, okay, how can we grow that business? And I think that one of the biggest parts of that is how we tell our story. And I think we'll have a little bit more of information about that at lunchtime today. But there's some ideas that the industry is working on, and you'll hear about that at the luncheon today. I can tell you that the CAB Radio CEO Council are re-engaged in the whole conversation about marketing, not necessarily the Radio Marketing Bureau as we once knew it, but some form of marketing for our industry. This is great news. I think Numeris can obviously play a big role in that because Numeris provides the data we need to tell the story. And we need to continue to improve our product, our content, and we can do this. We always have done this. Radio is forever trying to reinvent itself and to improve itself, and we're very, very good at that. So with that in mind, this is what the committee, we kind of worked on building sessions and bringing in speakers and panelists that will provide you with some real take-home value, stuff that you can actually take home and put on your radio stations tomorrow. And along with hopefully some interesting ideas and suggestions for the future planning and innovation that our industry needs to help for us to continue to remain strong going forward. From radio's roadmap to the future, the session that's going to start later this morning, to our annual industry executive town hall session to close out the day, the OAB has assembled arguably one of the best speaker lineups we've had in recent memory. I think you're going to be in for a great ride. Just like to pay attention here to a couple of people who really helped out this year. Very important to note these people, and these people all volunteered. Dave Farrow, Chris Burns, Val Skivington, Chris Nimagon, Maura Austin, and Doug Kirk all pitched in tremendously to help put this whole event here together. There's a whole bunch of salespeople across the hall over there too. Thank you. And of course, we're in broadcasting. Where would we be without our sponsors? So I want to pay attention here to a couple of them right now. Factor, Acadia Broadcasting, the Canadian Traffic Network, Rogers Radio, and Numeris, the sponsors for that marvelous breakfast that we had earlier this morning. So that's the layout for the day. Again, I encourage you to talk with each other. There's going to be the quality of people here is tremendous. Reach out and talk to them. I mean, the conversations we all know that you have in the halls, that's where you get a lot of great value in these things. So please do that. There's too many good people here not to take advantage of that. And one of those people, just to get us started, our keynote this morning, I was talking to him last night, and he flew in literally from the UK last night. He's flying home tonight. James Cridland probably spends more time in airports and hotels than everyone in this room together. He's that busy. He's recognized around the world as a radio advocate, a radio broadcaster, and a radio futurist. And as much as broadcasters are trying to make sure that they're doing everything today to succeed in this multimedia, multi-platform, multi-choice environment, we all know that we need to keep an eye out for what the world will look like tomorrow. Not 18 months down the road, just 6 months down the road. That's how quickly it's changing. And of course, 5 years in the future. That's what we need to be looking out for. I think you're about to get a glimpse of that from a global perspective from our keynote speaker. Please welcome James Cridland.
Thank you very much. So what I thought I'd do today is to look at what's going on in radio across the world. I think there's lots of things that we can learn from other countries across the world. But first, let me tell you a little bit about me. This is my first radio. I saved up. I had to eat an awful lot of sugary cereal. As you can see, it completely ruined my figure. And I got this when I was 6, and I was absolutely enthralled. This is a little AM radio, and I used it for hours and hours and hours on the first day, and then I was really sad, and I said to my parents, I think I've used my radio up now, because I had no idea that the words and the speech and the music that came into it were actually getting broadcast into it. I thought that it was actually sent out with all of this speech in there. That's how little I knew about radio. I'm from the UK. If there are any Americans in the audience, the UK is this one. And I've worked in radio all my life, so this is me on a radio station in the north of England about 20 or so years ago. I worked for the original Virgin Radio out of London, so good they closed it down. And one of the things I did at this radio station is I launched the world's first mobile phone app for a radio station. We called it a 3G tuner, which sounds all quite fancy. This is it. This is cutting-edge technology for 10 years ago. Look at that. You needed a stylus and everything else. I believe that BlackBerrys still look like this now. Then I worked for the BBC, reworking how audio worked on there and helping them with the launch of the radio player in the UK. And now I discover that when you print your own business cards, you can literally call yourself anything. So I'm a radio futurologist, working with a bunch of different organizations that you can see there, as well as running my own website, media.info, which has lots of information about media in Europe and in Australia. So today I'm going to talk about what's going on in radio across the world. If you're a TV broadcaster, actually quite a lot of this is just as important for you guys too, and I hope you like graphs because there might be a few of them. But firstly, let's talk about the future of radio, and who best to ask than Lord Kelvin. This is him. He's an amazing British scientist. He found absolute zero. He invented lots of interesting things, and when asked about the future of radio, Lord Kelvin said, radio has no future. So that's all okay. 1899. I'm being a little bit unfair because actually I've quoted him out of context. This is his full quote. Radio has no future. Aeroplanes are impossible, and X-rays will prove to be a hoax as well. I think it just goes to show that we don't always get the future correct, but hopefully I'm going to get part of the future correct today. But we know, don't we, that when television came along, everybody said, well, that's it for radio. Radio's dead now because television's here, and why would you want to listen to something when you can watch something? So the TV was supposed to kill radio off. As we know, it hasn't. Then this was supposed to kill radio off. There's some audio here. I promise you there's some beautiful audio here. There we are. Boy or a girl, I don't know. But anyway, the Walkman was supposed to kill off radio as well, and of course radio didn't. This is the front page of Wired magazine 10 years ago. A bullet going through the front of a radio with the end of radio on it. Fox News, fair and balanced, apparently, saying that radio is dead 5 years ago. Is Apple iTunes next? No, Fox News radio is not dead, and no, Fox News Apple iTunes will not be next either. There's been no end of people who have been waiting to blow up the wonderful industry that we all know and love. I nearly got the timing right there. I'm impressed at myself. The good news, of course, as we know, is that radio is actually in good shape. It's in good shape right around the world, whether you're looking at the UK, whether you're looking at Brisbane in Australia, where my family moves next week, everything's in cardboard boxes, whether you're looking here in Canada, the US, Malaysia, the Philippines, I believe in Manila, it's 98% of people tune into the radio every single week, a figure which is so amazing, I'm not even sure that I believe it. But you can see that radio is actually in really good shape. Where radio has been a traditional part of the media landscape, radio is in great shape. So we shouldn't really be talking it down. Radio is being used really well, and I think that this is a really good sign, as is this, by the way. In fact, radio is so successful that it's just part of our everyday life. So this is something that I saw in a Minneapolis newspaper last year. It says that officers went to the Discovery Center regarding a suspicious vehicle. The drivers told officers he had stopped to listen to a good song on the radio. So there you go, radio helping petty thieves and stalkers everywhere. And in Nigeria, radio is so important that if you steal a car radio, my goodness me, it's bad news for everybody. So radio is in really, really good shape, but there's lots which is actually changing, and I'm going to take you through some of the ways that radio is changing. And firstly, the way that we listen to radio is changing, because radio used to be purely AM or then AM and FM. Now, lots of different ways of tuning in to the radio. So this is a TV ad in India, and we're going through all of the different pieces of history of Indian music. So up to the 1980s, I believe now. Cheers, Nokia. It turns out that in India, this is an amazing stat, 94% of radio listeners in India tune into radio on a mobile phone, on the FM chip, by the way. Only 16% actually tune into a radio receiver. So radio is actually consumed in very many different ways throughout the world, as it is in Europe as well. Here's a nice man who's going to tell us exactly that.
Radioen digitaliseres. Du kan høre digitalradio via internett, digital-TV eller DAB+. Les mer om din nye radiohverdag på radio.no.
Possibly the first time you've ever heard Norwegian in this room. That's going on in Norway, where they're showing you all of the different ways that you can tune into radio. Here are the latest figures from the UK. This is TSL, the total amount of time spent listening to the radio. And in the UK, just 50% is to analog radio, FM or AM. The others are to other platforms. We have radio through the TV, about 20 channels through the aerial, about 100 channels if you have satellite TV. DAB, which is kind of our equivalent of HD radio, but not quite, and tuning in online and apps. Let's do a show of hands, just to find out whether you're all still awake. That would be a good thing. I hope you are. Which do you think is the next most popular? So we see that FM and AM has 50%. Which is the next most popular? Who thinks it's radio through the TV? Next most popular way of listening to radio? Show of hands. Okay, one person. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you can hear me. Who thinks it's DAB radio, another way of broadcasting radio through? Okay, 3 or 4, 5 hands. And who thinks it's online and apps? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And what's really interesting is this is the same in Norway. It's the same in Australia. It's the same in any multi-platform environment. And actually, online and apps doesn't deliver quite the amount of TSL that you expect it to. Online and apps is a very important part of our future, but it's not the only part. And broadcast radio still has a tremendous future in terms of radio. In fact, it's more complicated than that. Here are 2 radio stations. They aren't available on FM or AM, but they are available on lots of other platforms. Here's Radio 6 Music, which most of its radio listening happens on DAB. That's a radio station aimed at sort of 35-year-olds who are quite tall, wear glasses, bit of a beard, good sense of humor, like great music. And One Extra, which is a radio station which is an urban radio station. It's aimed at sort of 15-year-olds. It's just a noise. their listeners tune in a very different way, with lots more listening over the TV. Why might that be? Well, because quite a lot of kids don't have radios in their bedroom anymore, but they certainly do have TVs, and they can get a great radio station on there as well. And here are some of the latest figures showing actually how radio is changing. These are year-on-year figures in terms of TSL. What I find really interesting here is 6 Music, that same radio station that we just saw there. The amount of hours on TV has really increased. It's more than doubled. And internet radio listening has actually gone down, which I find quite fascinating. And again, Capital Extra, another urban station, another just, a lot of noise. They, as you can see again, double the amount of time spent listening on TV, and internet going up alongside DAB. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in terms of how people are tuning in. And the same's going on in Norway as well. What they're doing here is they're actually turning off FM in 2017. So all of the big radio stations are coming off FM, going on to DAB Plus only. What that essentially means that instead of a typical Norwegian town having 4 or 5 radio stations, then they will have about 25 radio stations. Which is a big change. And as you can see, the way that people are tuning into radio is really changing in Norway as well. One of the things that they've been doing is actually launching additional radio stations. And here's one of them. So NRK P1 is the big radio station in Norway. It's the big public service radio station. They wanted to make this radio station a bit younger. The music was a bit old, their audience were literally dying, so they decided that they would make it a little bit younger, but they didn't want to annoy the older audience, so they gave them their own radio station, NRK P1 Plus. And NRK P1 Plus has really driven the adoption of new platforms and new ways of tuning in to radio, and this is the exciting sound that you can expect if you tune into NRK P1 Plus. Go for it, Hans Petter.
Mandag klokka 9 sørger jeg for god stemning og spennende gjester på NRK P1+. Du kan høre meg på nett, mobil eller en DAB-radio.
Stemmen du kjenner. NRK P1+.
Very nice. Lots of working together in Norway with the commercial broadcasters, the public service broadcasters, to help DAB Plus really succeed, and radio on all of the other platforms. And also lots of working together in other places as well. This is what the crazy Dutch are doing.
Let's get digital, digital. I wanna get digital. Let's get into digital. Radio is digital. Let's get digital, digital. I wanna get digital. Let's get
Digital Radio Plus. Dat is genieten van meer zenders en digitale geluidskwaliteit. En het zit gewoon gratis in de lucht. Luister jij al naar je digitale DAB Plus radio?
Crikey, faces for radio certainly in that lot, isn't there? But actually, what's really important here is different radio companies, different radio broadcasters, all working together to make sure that the radio industry has a great future. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from all of that. So you've seen one new radio brand. Let me show you a few more, because new technology, whether it's online, whether it's DAB+, whether it's HD radio here in North America, offers you the chance to really grow your business in some really interesting ways. Here's one example. This is in South Africa, an online additional radio station that was on the air last year when the Oscar Pistorius trial was going on. So run by Prime Media, which is a large media company out there that runs 94.7 Highveld stereo, as well as talk radio stations in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. They added a whole additional radio station with just non-stop information about the Oscar Pistorius trial.
When you aren't listening to 94.7 Highveld stereo, there's only one thing you really should listen to. Oscar Extra. Hit highveld.co.za. Catch special broadcasts covering the Oscar Pistorius murder trial, with more of the latest updates, from outside the courtroom to the bench, from the dock to the witness stand, with more on everything Oscar. Oscar Extra. You'll find it on highveld.co.za.
So great opportunity for them to add additional services that their audience wanted. If the regulations allowed it, great opportunity for them to get that sponsored. I'm guessing the NRA might have sponsored that one. But you can see that great opportunities there in terms of adding additional stations. Here's what's going on in Australia. The public radio organisation down there, one of the two actually, has a bunch of additional radio stations online, on TV, and on DAB+. The really interesting one, from my point of view, is this one, ABC Extra. What ABC Extra is it's a radio station without a format. It's a radio station which just does different things. So at the moment, as you can see, it's broadcasting Australian Music Month. It's a big thing in Australia right now, where they're just broadcasting Australian music. Quite a lot of the time, it's off the air. Sometimes it's rebroadcasting other radio stations of interest. So it did that around the Christchurch earthquake from New Zealand, when they simply rebroadcast Radio New Zealand, so you could hear how your friends were getting on there. But they've also done additional radio stations. Here's one that they ran for literally a week around the Lunar New Year. We would call this the Chinese New Year in the UK. Specific programming around that. Here's one that they only broadcast over a weekend. A channel called Back to Vinyl, where they played everything off vinyl to celebrate the 25th anniversary or the 30th anniversary of the CD. Really interesting idea of playing with new formats, seeing what works and what doesn't, and doing it on an additional radio station that won't harm your main figures. And this kind of pop-up radio station is going on all over the place. Here's another example. BBC Radio 2 has a country show. We don't have any country radio stations really in the UK, but Radio 2 has its own country show that goes out for a couple of hours a week. They launched an additional radio station for 4 days, just 4 days, that broadcast country. And it looked and sounded a bit like this.
Introducing BBC Radio 2 Country, a 4-day pop-up digital service dedicated to the world of country music. Featuring live performances from the Country to Country Festival, as well as your favourite Radio 2 presenters. Listen now to BBC Radio 2 Country.
Really successful for them. It had hundreds of thousands of people who tuned in. They managed to get it into the official ratings figures, although they never actually told us how many people were actually tuning in. But they did really well. The sales of new radios went up as well. And again, an additional way of doing something new and interesting for your audience that also helped grow the Radio 2 brand and made it really clear that, yes, Radio 2 does have country on there. But this is the real interesting part. Absolute Radio, commercial radio station in the UK. What they did is they saw the real benefit that online could actually give them and DAB could actually give them. And instead of having one radio station, they added a bunch of additional radio stations that focused on individual genres of music. So Absolute Radio 80s, amazingly, just plays 80s songs. Absolute Radio 70s, 70s songs, and so on and so forth. This was really interesting because what they've managed to do with these additional radio stations is a couple of very clever things. Firstly, there's actually no clever music scheduling here. What they've done is they've taken their main music database and they've just filtered it down. So there was no big hard work to launch many of these services. Secondly, what they do is they actually take some of the broadcasting that they're doing on the main channel. So Jeff Lloyd's Home Time show is up there at the top from Absolute Radio. They take the links from that, the presenter breaks, and they then put those presenter breaks into some of their other services later. So you can see on Absolute Radio 60s down here, you can see there's Jeff Lloyd's 60s Home Time show with the presenter breaks from when he was on earlier, slotted into a bunch of 60s, 70s, and 90s music, and so on. So you can actually see that going on. So taking great content that the radio station already had and getting the best possible value out of that and keeping people within the Absolute Radio brand. And if that doesn't look complicated enough, look what they do at breakfast. This is one of their slides, which I've stolen because it's far too complicated for me to copy. What they do at breakfast time, because breakfast is a very important show of the day, it's really got to be live. That's where the majority of the sponsorship and promotions revenue goes. So what they do here is they have that live radio show that goes out, but depending on what radio station you're listening to, you hear different songs. And all of this is completely automatic. They're using some very clever technology produced for them by RCS to automatically match individual songs in there, which is really neat. I think it's very, very clever that they've actually worked out that 60s songs are shorter than 80s songs as well in there. Really cool. So what's that done to their audience, and what's that done to their revenue? Well, here's a graph showing you, well, it's had a tremendous effect. So it's more than doubled their total TSL for the radio station, which is great. The main radio station, as you can see, hasn't actually been eroded by the launch of all of these additional services. So they now have twice the amount of airtime to sell, and a number one, because Absolute Radio 80s is the number one non-analog channel available in the UK on commercial radio. So they've done really tremendously well from a relatively cheap brand extension going on there. KISS in the UK has done something similar with KISS Fresh, a younger version of KISS, which is a dance station, and Kisstory, an older version of that individual station. In Australia, Triple M launched Triple M Classic Rock, an older version of their individual station. That is the most listened to commercial radio station on DAB in Australia. The second most listened to, by the way, and this just hurts my head, is an in-store radio station for a supermarket. Second most listened to radio station. Either they've worked out that actually PPMs are very clever if you're walking around a supermarket, which might be the case, but also actually it's quite a nice mix of music for all I understand, and I would guess it's relatively commercial free because it's only advertising the stuff that you can actually buy in there. Interesting, and also clearly the radio station that runs this gets money from Coles as well. Quite an interesting thing. This is also a trend which is going on across the world, and it's a trend whenever I look into North America, I get very confused because there's an awful lot of KISS radio stations across North America. There's an awful lot of mix radio stations that actually all broadcast slightly different music, that have very different branding, very different styles. The radio station's called after letters, Q. Radio station's called after animals, the beaver, the fish. All of these, the aardvark, all of these radio stations. We had that in the UK for a long time. So this is a bunch of radio stations which existed in the UK until relatively recently. And what the owner of this radio station realized once he'd bought all of them is he realized, you know what, actually this makes no sense. It makes no sense in terms of social media, because there are people talking about these radio stations across the UK. It makes no sense in terms of social media and the internet. It makes no sense in terms of marketing. It makes no sense in terms of advertisers who simply do not understand that Trent FM is actually the same radio station as Red Dragon, same music format and everything else. They just simply do not understand that. So they said, right, we're just going to blow them all up. We're just going to get rid of all of that. We're just going to call it one brand. We're just going to call it Capital FM. And that's what they did. And it means that you can do marketing like the UK's #1 hit music station, and you can get a few minor stars to appear in their TV ads.
Time to turn it up. Capital.
It's back to back. Hits.
We make them.
Capital plays them.
The biggest artists, the best music.
The hits now.
The UK's #1 hit music station. Capital.
So when you look, particularly into the US, and you look at WPLJ, and you look at KISS, and you look at KFOG, and you look at this massive, great big range of catchy full-letter acronyms, and you just wonder, what's that saying to advertisers when you then have somebody walking in and saying, hi, I'm from Pandora. You've probably heard of us. It's a massive, great big deal. And it's something, brand consolidation is something that we've done a lot of in the UK. It's something that Australia is also looking at, getting rid of those local heritage brands, putting in brands KISS and HIT into the Australian market. Important to point out, these are not networked radio stations. They still have local breakfast shows, local drive shows. They can still have local presenter breaks through the day if they want to. They've all got local advertising on there. It's just a coherent brand that you can talk to advertisers, you can talk to audiences about. So that instead of saying you'll find us on your local radio station, all of a sudden it's you'll find us on Capital or on Heart or on Smooth or on KISS. Simple, relatively straightforward. And the way that we make radio is changing. And this is another trend that I'm spotting all over the world. So this is a radio station that I did some work for, not then, in the 1970s when it launched, but this was a radio station that I did a ton of work for. And when they launched in the 1970s, their studio facilities were, you know, millions of dollars. Hugely expensive thing. And that is no longer needed if you're running radio stations. Let's go on to 2009. This radio station is a kids radio station in London, and it does not have its own studios. It shares them with a bunch of other broadcasters. It's mostly running off a playout system, a great big rack of equipment, but works really, really well. Newer ways of running radio stations. Let's go up to 2010. Here's a radio station in a suitcase. This is in Indonesia. I would caution, don't get too close to that red antenna on the top. That might hurt. But there they are with a playout system of sorts on their laptop with a CD player, a mixer and so on. They use this to get radio into areas with flooding and other things going on. 2013, a radio station out of Oslo in Norway where everything happens on just one computer. Playout, processing, encoding for online and for DAB, all on that one computer. Really interesting, simple, straightforward model. This is something in Ghana. This is a radio station in a bucket. There's a smartphone in this bucket. There's also a transmitter. There's a battery. And what the smartphone does, really simple and really clever actually, there's a piece of software on that smartphone that you can control as the broadcaster that actually flicks between individual live streams, which it can pick up, pre-recorded stuff that it can download, all of that. The reason for the buckets, by the way, is to keep it waterproof, because it rains quite a lot there. You don't need a goat, by the way, to make it work. The goat's just an optional extra, I believe. This is where I think, though, that we're going. I think that we are going for part of our industry. I think we're going to this. Playout, processing, and encoding into millions of computers in your mobile phone. And I say this might happen in 2020. It's kind of happening now. Here's something that the BBC have announced for the fourth time. A very interesting way of taking programming from all of their 50 different radio stations in the UK, adding a program schedule so you can choose the programming that you want, and it just sits there and automatically plays you your radio station. Something that they've announced and that are hoping to launch in the next year or so.
This is NPR.
NPR One.
And then there's this.
You're listening to NPR.
NPR One.
So if you run a news talk radio station, this is an app which you should be downloading today and playing with. It's really cool and really clever. Let me tell you how it works a bit. You go into this NPR One app. The first thing it does is it plays you the latest news. It's a new revolutionary concept. Wouldn't that be lovely if we could do that in broadcast radio? But of course you can do that in an app. So it plays you the latest national and local news from your local NPR station. Then it goes into reports, news reports from both of those, with live cues from the presenters going into individual packages. And the app ends up playing you more stories that it thinks that you will like. Really simple, really straightforward. It's kind of like a Pandora for news. So you started with some Dallas stories, and then getting people to work harder, and then a story about Greece in there, and then maybe you might get a story about Islamic State fighters. You can mark them as interesting. Wise choice, not using like, I think. But you can mark them as interesting. You can skip past them as well. And of course, that means that the app begins to learn much more about the stories that you'll like and the stories that you won't. This is a concept that I call atomization. So what they've done here is they've taken the live broadcast output, they've cut the live broadcast output into individual component parts with the metadata that helps them reassemble that later. So that you end up with something which is a much more personalized experience. What's really interesting with this, though, is that algorithm that works out what story you might be interested in next has more than doubled time spent listening in that app. Time spent listening in the app is now 30 minutes, which is massive if you've looked at the time spent listening in your mobile apps. More than that, they've actually taken the data, because they can see exactly when people skip, they've taken the data from that to help their journalists write better cues. Because, of course, they can end up doing some really interesting things with that, too. So the app is actually making better radio for everybody using the data that they're learning on how people end up using that. It's really cool. You should definitely take a look at that. There's another company doing something similar, Rivet Radio, out of Chicago, and they have lots of different pieces of content that they are pulling in to that particular app, and again, giving you a personalized feed. And then there's this.
Customizable radio is on your smartphone, and it's free. Omni lets you choose the best radio shows and your favorite music, then mixes it into a station just for you. Radio your way, designed by you. Omni, free to download now.
So this is going on in Melbourne in Australia, and again, you can see that, again, it's taking individual atoms of radio and stitching it together into something which is more personalised. So the nice man in the middle gets Sydney news, followed by Sydney weather and Sydney traffic, and then he gets a music track, and then he gets his own emails read to him while he's in the car. Really neat and really clever. And then this, which launched last week in London. This is Capital Extra, their urban radio station, and this is a brand new radio app that they've called Skippable Radio.
Welcome to My Capital Extra, where you're in control of the music. To get started, go to My Capital Extra in the menu, swipe left while listening to live radio, or hit the skip button on the play bar at the bottom of the screen. Once you're in My Capital Extra, you can see the next 8 songs we've got coming up for you. Not feeling a particular track? Simply swipe left to replace it with another big tune and line up your ultimate version of the Capital Extra playlist. In My Capital Extra, all your favourite DJs will still be bringing you the biggest music, news and gossip, but now it's interactive.
Totally honest with you, it is Capital Extra. Nice work, picking the tunes. I'm loving what you're doing. You know that track from Tiny Temper and Katie B, KDA? The guys were in talking to Jez Wellham off of Capital Extra in the morning yesterday. So they totally said a really interesting fact about producer KDA. You're going to want to hear it. It's cool. You need to know these kind of things. We need to get to know KDA, especially after he's brought out such a banger like that. So yeah, you can go and check that out. I don't want to spoil it for you. Why not? Just give your screen a tap.
Simply tap the screen when we tell you to, or whenever you see the flashing icon, and you'll get taken straight to the story we're talking about.
And also, like I said, you can get that tune on. We've been talking about it. Get it on. It's an absolute banger.
Capital Extra.
If at any time you want to go back to live radio, simply tap the play bar at the bottom of the screen or go to live in the menu. My Capital Extra is available to download now from the Apple App Store. Just search Capital Extra, or if you've got the app already, just get the latest update. It's time for you to take control.
So this is really neat. So what they're doing there is you can skip out of the live radio station feed. You still get the same music that was scheduled, but you're just in a bit more control. You can do a little bit of reordering if you like, but you'll never be able to play, the Eagles into this or any of that kind of stuff. And you still get presenter breaks, because the presenters are recording links for this, voice tracking links for this, as they're doing their live show on the air as well. Really interesting way of taking live simulcast radio and making a slightly more interactive version of that, with all the best bits about radio for mobile phones as well. I believe that they are going to be adding this for all of their other brands in the UK, so for the main Capital Station and for Heart and Smooth and so on. Well worth keeping an eye on that and seeing what that does. And of course, what that can give you is personalized advertising in there as well, which I won't go into too much detail about. But the whole concept there is Lego bricking. It's taking those individual atoms that I was talking about earlier, taking all of those individual pieces of output and sticking those together in a way that makes sense, local, relevant sense for the audience. I spent ages making that last night in the hotel room. I hope you're impressed. So then there's on-demand, of course. And I have two interesting graphs. This is the first time you've ever heard the word interesting and graph put next to one another, but two interesting graphs to end up showing you about how on-demand is actually working. Here's one of them, which leads you to think, well, what on earth is the point of spending time with podcasting and on-demand? If 96.6% of all of the time that we spend listening is to live radio, and frankly, the amount of on-demand is very low, why on earth are we bothering? Well, we're bothering because it's not just a TSL game, it's more than that. It's also a game of what the audience wants at certain times of day. So this shows you people tuning into live radio, the green at the top. And you can see, as you would expect, nice big peak at breakfast, a couple of peaks around driving around lunch. And then at the bottom, it's showing you people using podcasting, on-demand radio, all that kind of stuff. And there are two really interesting parts in this. One part is that jump at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that jump, I think, is kids coming home from school and beginning to use on-demand audio. That's what the data would seem to actually show you. The second one, though, is at 11 o'clock at night. And interestingly, we're seeing this with our on-demand TV players as well, where there's a real jump as people are lying in bed and they're catching up with the media that they missed that day. So people are really using it. There are certain times of day when on-demand audio, radio, is being used more than live radio. And that's, I think, a trend just to keep in mind as we look at the best way of getting the value out of the great content that we're actually making.
It is the internet sensation that has captured the imagination of millions. Apple calls Serial the most popular podcast in the world. It's a real-life crime story about a 15-year-old murder case. The series is raising new questions about this investigation. Jan Crawford is in Washington.
I love this. This news report is brilliant.
Jan, I've been hearing so much about it. Good morning.
Well, good morning. You know, it's being called a pop culture obsession, and you can't watch it on TV or Netflix. You actually can't watch it anywhere. It's kind of like the old days of radio.
Cheers, Jan. Thanks for that. Serial is massive, as you know. Serial is absolutely massive. So, and it's been massive because it's really got people's attention. If you've listened to Serial, and there have been 100 million downloads, I think, so far, then you will already recognize what's going on here. This is the trip between somewhere where somebody killed somebody and somewhere where somebody buried somebody, and they're busy working out whether or not you could drive in the time that the evidence says that you could. This isn't from Serial. This is from a fan of the show that decided that they would go and do the same drive that they did in one of the episodes of Serial just to check out whether the timings work. This is how into this particular program people have got. It's a fascinating drive through Baltimore. But what you really see from things like Serial is, yes, 100 million downloads so far. But the really important part there is that well over 2/3 of those downloads have happened this year, and there have been no new episodes of Serial made this year. So it's the long tail, it's that use of the archive. People going back, they've heard about Serial in the past. They've heard about people wittering on about it at conferences for the last year and a half. And so they want to go back and actually have a listen to it. So keeping things available in perpetuity on your website is hugely important, as Serial is really showing, because people are still downloading this and still consuming it for the first time. Secondly, what Serial again are doing is they're making the very best use out of their great content. They've just announced that Pandora will be streaming Serial so that a whole set of new people will hear Serial within the Pandora product, but also Pandora can sell the advertising in there, which is very clever. So there'll be more revenue all over the place there. And this stuff really couldn't really work very well on the radio. And I think that's the other side. This is a program schedule from a radio station that no longer exists. See if you can guess why in the UK. A radio station called One Word. And the idea behind One Word was that it was a radio station full of audiobooks. And so if I tuned in at 6 o'clock in the morning, I could hear the Brothers Karamazov, and I would be listening to episode 7 of 23. I've got no idea what's happened in the previous 6 episodes. It's almost impossible for me to understand what on earth's going on. Is it any wonder that this radio station didn't really work? But of course it does work in terms of podcasting, because you can go back and you can start all over again. So podcasting sometimes can free you up to do different things with your story arcs and different things with your content that you couldn't necessarily do with broadcasting live radio. So, you know, I think it's just worthwhile also pointing out that regular podcast listeners in the US, and there are quite a few of them now, they listen to more podcasts than they do live radio. Still not massive numbers, but we're beginning to see an interesting shift in terms of on-demand as well. And of course, we make great content, so therefore that should be our content there as well. Finally, very quickly, I'm just going to quickly talk about visualizing radio. It's a trend which, again, is going on around the world. And it's the trend of adding pictures, adding video to the radio programming that you end up making. So here's an example. This is a seminal piece of radio history in the UK. In Australia, where Kyle and Jackie O, they used to be the #1 breakfast show in Sydney for a station called Today. They jumped ship. They went to a different radio station which rebranded, and this was their first show on the air on this brand new radio station.
It's a history-making day for us here at KISS FM. It is a brand new radio station, and we have got a jam-packed show. We're started right now.
Let's do it.
Don't muck around. Welcome, everyone. Morning.
Broadcasting live across Sydney and around the world. Kyle, Jackie O. This is the Kyle and Jackie O Show. Yes.
Now, can we just kill the audio completely? Can we just kill it completely? Let's keep on watching. Now look, that's amazing audio. Whenever I hear that, it still sends shivers up my spine because it's so well put together. This is a really crappy TV experience, isn't it? I think I'm just going to have a quick sip of my tea. And this is one of the problems, and one of the things. Let's keep the audio all the way down, because you can see that when you sling TV cameras into the corners of studios, you don't get a particularly exciting experience. This is a little bit of Good Morning Scotland. I'm going to leave the audio off because, frankly, you don't want to hear it. But this is something back in the 1980s where they were busy working out what can we do with breakfast television. Is there a way of doing live TV from the radio station? They still talk about this now, of what a nightmare it was, all of a sudden producing a radio program with pictures as well, because they had to do so many different things that they weren't used to end up doing. Look at the desk there. Look at that hairstyle. So there's a bunch of this kind of stuff going on. In Italy, there's a radio station that runs its own satellite TV channel, and everything that it does is live. This begins to look a little bit smarter, where all of the jingles that they play have video components, all of the music that they play the music videos, and so on. This is a news show, as you might be able to guess from the news show's title, Non-Stop News. And so they're beginning to understand the language about how to put live radio onto the TV. This, though, is the reason why. You should be looking at visualizing radio, but not necessarily visualizing live radio. Keeping what you're doing so that if you've got some great shareable content, then share that content with other people and make that really easy to do with video, because very few people share audio content. So this is a great example, and there is some audio here, if you wouldn't mind sticking it back up, from London's LBC, where the mayor, who runs, by the way, the public service transit, he was asked how much a public service, how much a tube ticket cost if he didn't have his Oyster card, his Go card, his public transit card. Of course, he should know, really, shouldn't he? Well, let's have a look. Oh, I went to press the button far too soon there, didn't I? Let's see if I can go back and show it to you, because it's worthwhile showing. And this is my last video clip anyway, so here we go.
If you were, you're telling us the London Underground is good value. If you were to go to your nearby,
it is a fantastic system.
And buy a one-way ticket, Angel, to London Bridge, which of course would be close to your place of work, how much would it cost you to travel one way, Angel, to London Bridge?
On an Oyster card?
No, just a one-off trip. You've forgotten your Oyster. Angel to London Bridge. How much is that going to cost you?
I've got the figures here. I've got the.
Okay,
if you get a.
I don't know what you're finding difficult about this. You're quite a well-educated man. You present yourself at Angel Station. You want to go to London Bridge. You haven't got your Oyster. What else do you need to know? Ticket seller's name?
Yeah. Wait. If you got your Oyster card, I think it's gone up to £2.
Pardon? £2?
£2.10. I use the Oyster card because it's the cheapest way of getting it.
You've forgotten it. It's in your suit that the wife has sent to the cleaners.
I always use.
How much is the fare?
Always use your Oyster card. I can give you. Do you want me to recite? Where's? So I'll give you. Here we go. Here's the whole list. Here we go. Okay.
Even I do this.
Here we go.
And I don't use the things.
If you want a one-way ticket.
Of course, I just realised standing here where you had Rob Ford as your mayor, so frankly. But you can see that is a great piece of shared audio and shared experience. What LBC have now done is that they've completely rebuilt their radio studios, as you can see. Much better camera angles, much better lighting and everything else to make it an even more shareable experience. So actually, one of the things just to bear in mind is that visualizing radio doesn't always have to be live. It can be used as really helping you share great pieces of content, as well. And Absolute Radio as well, doing some really interesting things there. So what is the future of radio? Well, the future of radio, I think, is really bright. We know that people are tuning into radio. We know that people are still tuning into radio, even though all of the massive, great big changes in terms of interactive, in terms of broadband, in terms of YouTube and everything else, people are still tuning into radio. The total reach, the total amount of people who are tuning in is very similar now than it was 10 years ago. TSL slightly eroding, but not by much. If you compare and consider all of the massive changes that we've seen in the last 10 years. But more than that, I think the future of radio is a great future for those with unique content. And actually those that invest in amazing content which is shareable, content which is real and relevant, those people have a great future ahead of them. And you can smile because you've got that fantastic content. Your audiences can smile, your advertisers can smile as well. We can all smile if we bear in mind that the future of radio is a really good one. So thank you for your time this morning, and I hope that was useful. Thanks. Now, I notice there are people hovering with a microphone. Is that for Q&As or is that for the next bit? That's for Q&As. Brilliant. If anybody's got any questions, then that's a good thing. Yes. Chuck. Yes.
Fascinating as usual, James.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, Pandora is picking up a serial. Is it picking up the original series? Or are they taking the second season?
They're taking the second season, yeah.
So this will be all new content.
So you will hear, yeah, so it'll be all new content. So they will, it's not exclusive, so you'll still be able to download it as a podcast. But what they're doing is they're weaving serial into the Pandora music service. It'll be interesting seeing quite what the audience think of that. But yeah, that's what their plan is doing.
So when you talk about the future of radio, and if we can look at television and the competition that television, the traditional networks have seen with Netflix and Amazon and Apple and whatever, what do you foresee in terms of the future of radio? Do you see, now Pandora already has said we're going to be a player in this radio business, even via their system. Google.
Yeah, you know, and Google are just doing. Google have just said that they're bringing podcasts to the Android ecosystem, which sounds really good and really exciting. We all make podcasts in this room, so that's a fantastic opportunity for us. I think it's interesting. I think lots of different ways to get your content in front of people. And sometimes I liken putting a live radio stream of your radio station onto a mobile phone as being a bit like putting a PDF of a newspaper onto the internet. It's fine, it works, but we can probably do a little bit better. And so I think we need to be a little bit cleverer in terms of some of the content that we have, how we package that up for use in an online and connected environment.
And broadcasters have preached for 50 years, live and local, live and local. And you're saying live probably doesn't have the same cachet that it once did.
I'm actually saying, and I know that certainly in the US, live and local is an amazing thing. I like the alliteration of that. You know, live and local. I think it's real and relevant. I think that's where we should be going. And actually, live is of less importance than actually whether that content is relevant to people, whether we're using the human connection that we have. We could be talking to people based on their local community, based on their community of common interest, on lots of different relevant reasons. But you know, real and relevant is, I think, where the future of radio content ought to end up being. And there's lots, by the way, of radio content out there which is not real and which is not particularly relevant either. And I think if we focus a bit more on, it doesn't matter, frankly, whether the man who has just back announced Justin Bieber and is just about to announce Katy Perry, whether that presenter link actually comes from you know, a studio 10 miles away or 200 miles away. The actual really important thing is whether it's relevant and whether audiences really like that.
Anything's better than bad local radio, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And one last question, you know, in terms of talent
I sure hope that they're charging you by the question.
Yeah. In terms of talent for, you know, traditional radio.
Yeah.
Are broadcasters looking enough to the podcast to see where some of the strength of real talent is?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a bunch of different things that you can do in terms of finding new and interesting talent. I think that, you know, podcasting is clearly one thing that, and YouTube as well, clearly things that some broadcasters are looking at. I was actually talking to Chris Byrne last night. He was telling me some of the things that he does in the middle of the night on some of his stations, sticking people live where they can't necessarily cause too much damage to actually just see what they do. And I think there are great opportunities there. You know, my first air shift was overnight. It's mostly computerized now, but there's no reason why it need be. And I think there are great opportunities there.
That's my last one.
It's all right, Chuck. Thank you. Yeah.
Pop-up radio. I'm interested in that. Obviously, the digital platform is allowing all these pop-up radio stations to occur. Are they doing? Is there a monetary payoff for this thing? What's their motive? Is it marketing, or are they able to monetize these things?
So some of the pop-up stations, yes, they are monetized. Actually, the formatting is a little bit more relaxed on, you know, clearly online, but also on DAB as well. So you end up being able to do a little bit more So you can get entire radio stations sponsored. You can get radio stations, put together in terms of, being able to offer real opportunities for advertisers. The key thing here is to make sure that your additional radio stations appear in the same audience research figures that your main radio stations do. It's something that the Germans are beginning to wake up to, something that the Australians are beginning to wake up to. They released their first ever figures for DAB stations recently. That's really important because without the same currency, it's very hard to actually go out and monetize that and talk to advertisers about that. But there are some really good, interesting examples of radio stations that have temporary radio stations which are, which have a lot of advertorial on them, and it seems to work quite well. I think we have time for one more. There is one more. Thank you.
I notice a lot of customization in these radio apps and so on. Do you think, though, that perhaps by making it too complex, we're losing one of the basic features of radio, which is ease of use, push one button, and great stuff comes out?
I think that radio's user experience is, really important. And I think one of the mistakes that we've made with DAB, with HD, with other new forms of broadcasting radio is we've made it too complicated and too difficult. And I think, it's interesting, when you look at that NPR1 app, you can use it just like a radio. You can turn it on and it just sits there and makes and plays you stuff. If you want to interact with it, then great, you can. But actually, otherwise, it just sits there and plays you stuff. And I think that's really important. And if we make things too complicated and too difficult, then users typically don't end up using them anyway. So I think you're absolutely right. And we need to, just a really, obvious tip, if you're putting on-demand content on your website, on your radio station website, at the end of that on-demand content, don't make it go silent. Click onto your main live on-air stream. It's a simple, straightforward thing. You'd be amazed at how many radio stations don't actually do that. Why would you leave somebody with silence if they're still there? Why not actually give them more of what they wanted? So I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Good stuff. Thank you very much. I have a wonderful newsletter which you should all get. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, James.